I want to thank my patron supporters who are helping me make more videos more often. If you'd like to see more videos like this and would like to be a patron supporter, please go to patreon.com/TJR, the original. And if you can't be a patron supporter, please just click like. I also want to thank everybody who shares these videos on their social media. Hello, this is TJR. News that a classic album is going to be remixed will always be met with a certain amount of both excitement and trepidation. The excitement is understandable. There is always the potential that a new mix will reveal new audio nuances and musical elements that were previously unheard and allow us to enjoy the album in a whole new way. The trepidation is also understandable. The album is considered a classic for a reason, after all, and the original mix is part of that reason. Therefore, there should always be a good reason or a vision behind the remixing of a classic album, something that stretches beyond just the desire to repackage and resell it. Sometimes an album is remixed to right a previous wrong, a good example being the original artist was not happy with how the original mix sounded, or sometimes it is done to fix the technical limitations of a previous era. So if you are going to be remixing a classic album, there should be a good reason or a strong vision behind it, or both. When Giles Martin remixed the Sgt. Pepper album, he took the best elements of both that album's stereo and mono mixes and combined them into a new whole, thus giving us a stereo mix that wasn't possible back in the 60s. The intention of that remix was to remedy the technical limitations of a previous era, and this remix had to be approved by the surviving Beatles and their estates. A little over a week ago, my good friend Robert Kinsler shared his experience listening to the new 50th anniversary remix of All Things Must Pass by George Harrison in advance of the release date. In that video, he quoted from the liner notes written by George Harrison from the 30th anniversary remaster of the same album. And I want to share those with you right now. It's been 30 years since All Things Must Pass was recorded. I still like the songs on the album and believe they can continue to outlive the style in which they were recorded. It was difficult to resist remixing every track. All these years later, I would like to liberate some of the songs from the big production that seemed appropriate at the time, but now seems a bit over the top with the reverb in the wall of sound. So the intention of this new 50th anniversary remix seems clear. The intention was to grant George Harrison's wish from over 20 years ago. And this is a good intention to be sure. But even with good intentions, a remix is a tricky balancing act. Change the EQ settings for one track, and you can possibly affect how every other track sits in the mix. When news of the remix first broke, many Harrison fans expressed elation over the fact that the album would finally be unspecterized. Now, to be honest, I like the original mix. I felt that the original wall of sound production gave the album wonderful moments of majesty and magic. I also know that some fans really hate what Phil Spector did to Let It Be, but I think the original album sounds great. I do realize that the additional instrumental arrangements added to the recordings by Phil Spector were not appreciated by Paul McCartney. So I am also glad that the alternate mix entitled Let It Be Naked exists as well. And again, this is another example of doing a remix for the right reasons, and I liked both versions of Let It Be for different reasons. Since last weekend, I have been making A to B comparisons between the album's numerous tracks, going between my vintage vinyl copy of the original mix and the new vinyl re-release of the 2020 mix, and also comparing the streaming versions on Tidal of both the 30th anniversary remaster, which is still the original mix by the way, and the 2020 remix. So after living with this for a week, what do I think? Honestly, I feel there is a real yin and yang to all of it. For everything new that it gives, it also takes something old away. Yes, a lot of the Phil Spector wall of sound production has been scaled back, but it has not been completely removed. And aside from the scaling back of the album's wall of sound production, I hear very little change in where instruments were placed within their respective mixes. As an example, if say a particular instrument was panned more to the right in the original mix. It remains still panned to the right in the new mix as well. So in this respect, the new mix remains fairly faithful, but there is one very different and perhaps even radical change. Aside from scaling back the wall of sound, the other major difference in the 2020 remix is the one that everybody immediately notices when they first start to listen. George Harrison's vocals have been placed front and center. So what does this do sonically for the album? Well, at its best, it adds a sense of intimacy and warmth to many of the album's performances. But at other times, it takes away some of the majesty and magic that I mentioned earlier. And I'm going to discuss a couple of tracks in particular to illustrate my point today. On My Sweet Lord, the acoustic guitars at the song's opening have more presence and feel more natural and more warm. But Lost is what I can only describe as a kind of audio magic pixie dust that I used to hear on the original. And I'm referring to the single chords that ring out during the D major to B minor section of the song. My Sweet Lord opens with an E minor to A major, then enters into the D major and B minor section. During this time, you hear both the acoustic guitar rhythm and an overdubbed second acoustic guitar with what I'm guessing is an auto harp as well, doubling the chord. These overdubbed instruments are still there, but with the scaling back of the wall of sound production, they now sound less magical. The same holds true for the slide lead guitar that leads into the vocal. This new mix makes the electric guitar feel more intimate and sound more like a real guitar. It definitely feels more grounded and more like a real band is playing. But in the original mix, I feel that it had a more magical presence. On the other hand, I enjoy hearing the background keyboard having more presence in the new mix. So like I said, you may lose one thing in this mix, but you gain something else in return. Isn't It a Pity is one of George Harrison's most Beatle-like songs from his solo catalog. It feels like it could have fit onto the next Beatle album had there been one after Abbey Road. In this new mix, I can now distinguish the acoustic guitar that doubles the opening piano line. This is a part that wasn't so much buried as it was blended to make the two instruments sound like one, giving the piano a different tone in the original mix, a tone that felt a bit more not of this earth. This new mix makes the opening and the rest of the song feel more intimate, but again, lost is the dreamlike, ethereal quality that the original mix endowed this song with. Again, George Harrison's voice is up front and center in both of these tracks. When I listen, I can hear more sensitivity in his vocals now. I can hear more emotion. It feels like he's right there in front of you singing. But at the same time, the album's original production gave his vocals a quality that gives the impression to the listener that his voice is coming from some other realm beyond the material world. So how you will react will depend on whether you prefer intimacy over mysticism. And while we're on the topic of vocals, for decades, it never felt to me as if George Harrison's vocals were too low in the mix. But during my A to B comparisons, it becomes very clear that his vocals do in fact feel too far in the background from the other instruments. And now I can see how this must have been just terribly frustrating for George Harrison for so many decades. But again, there are also plenty of moments in the original mix where having his vocals a bit more awash with the rest of the instruments gives his vocal performance a more mystical presence. In addition, I also found that my opinion on a particular song could actually change depending on the source. When I compared Let It Down between its vinyl counterparts, the original mix from my vintage vinyl copy would win. The track felt muddier on the new version, whereas my original felt more explosive and the instruments felt more distinct. But when I compared their respective versions on streaming, it was more of a draw, with the original mix inching just a little bit ahead. The primary difference being that Tidal's version of the original mix is the 30th anniversary remaster. Still, no matter what I did, there were some instances where there was a clear winner. Apple Scruffs is an example of a song that really benefits from the new mix. It's much warmer, it feels more like you are sitting in someone's living room, and George Harrison and the band are performing an intimate house concert. The new mix feels more down home than the original one, and this is definitely an improvement. Behind That Locked Door feels more like a legitimate country western track on the new mix, but feels more dreamlike in the original. So where you stand becomes subjective to personal preference. I found myself leaning more towards the original, but also sensed that depending on my mood, I might choose the latter. Do you see where I'm going with all of this? When I look back at the Giles Martin remixes of Sgt. Pepper, The White Album, and Abbey Road, I felt a complete thumbs up. I felt that these new remixes, while not replacing the originals, offered a completely new way to appreciate these classic albums. I felt only yin and no yang. But on All Things Must Pass, I feel yin and yang throughout. And I think a lot of how you are going to come down on this will depend on how far you lean towards hearing the album unspecterized versus keeping the album's original production. The new 50th anniversary remix feels more grounded, it feels more intimate, and it works on the level that it's trying to work at, which is to grant George Harrison's wish from over 20 years ago. I am glad that it is here, and I am glad that it exists. And along with the original, I will continue to listen to it. But there will be those times when I am listening to it, when I will find myself missing that audio magic pixie dust. This is TJR, and those are my thoughts. Please let me know yours. Leave a comment. As always, if you like what I'm doing, be sure to click like, click subscribe, and smash that bell notification icon so you can know when I release new videos. Everybody, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you all stay safe and healthy. Bye-bye.